Hey everybody, it's Benji and Chris here. We've got episode number 7 of the Generation Fit podcast. Today we're going to be talking about 7 of the biggest fitness myths. Now, we could be going on for this for hours and hours on end. There are thousands of the biggest fitness myths because the fitness industry is just completely saturated with so much misinformation, so many charlatans that lie. And the last episode we did was about supplements. The whole episode was basically a misinformation episode. So there's just a plethora to go over, but today we're going to talk about 7 of some of the biggest ones and biggest questions we get regarding them. Before we get into this episode, I just want to remind everyone to go to www.thegenerationfit.com. We've got so many free resources, free guides that will help you in the pursuit of any of your fitness goals, and lots of other free information. We've got a newsletter as well that will help you out in terms of getting to your goals. So definitely go check that out, guys.
All right, so being podcast number 7, that we wanted to bring you 7 of the biggest fitness myths that we thought out.
Yeah, I actually didn't plan it that way, but that's perfect. Like, it works out perfectly.
Yeah, it just so happens to be.
Yeah.
So starting off with number 1 is stretching before a workout. So the thought was that to warm up the muscles, that we would stretch them prior to a resistance training bout. The problem with that is, as research came out, that in resistance training, you're actually shortening the muscle to perform whatever task that you're doing. So imagine that you're trying to produce the most amount of force with said muscle, in this case, the hamstring. And imagine right before that you stretched it, which is elongating the muscle. Now, when you elongate the muscle, that you're actually making it harder for it to shorten. So in this case, is lengthening the muscle before you have to shorten it is actually contraindicated in the research currently.
Yeah, people just stretch aimlessly whatever muscle they plan on training that day. But first of all, stretching, let's say that it gives you more range of motion. When you're just stretching and increasing range of motion, how is your strength through that range of motion, right? So like if I can lift a kettlebell over my head and as I stretch my lats more and more and have more range of motion in my shoulders, the further I bring it behind my head, imagine now if I have no strength through that range of motion now. So now I'm holding a 50-pound kettlebell above my head. I feel like my arm's just going to snap because I have no strength through that range of motion. So not to overdo mobility, which is an umbrella term encompassing lots of things, but a lot of times when people think that they need to stretch a muscle, they actually need more overall mobility, which is essentially just taking a muscle through a full range of motion with strength and stability. So all of those things are going to be very important. But when it comes to stretching a muscle, also, the idea was that it's going to help decrease delayed onset muscle soreness, which research isn't really very positive on that either.
Nope, it's for that end. In terms of recovery, your best thing is to make sure that your training intensity, or how hard you go, and your training volume, or how much you do, are good enough a stimulus for you, so you're not overdoing it to where you're sore for more than 2 days, 3 days, 4 days. And in that dosage, that if you do stretch out after a workout, yes, it can be beneficial because you just completely shortened every muscle that you're targeting.
Exactly, yeah.
So then if you want to stretch after a workout, then by all means, we actually do recommend it, and to lengthen the muscles to help it relax.
And it depends which muscle you're stretching based on your own circumstances. So like I was talking about before, people aimlessly stretch muscles, but what is your body? Everyone has their own muscular imbalances. So some people have extremely shortened muscles and extremely lengthened muscles. If you're just stretching muscles that are already more lengthened in your body than they should be relative to the other muscles around it, its antagonist muscles, then you're probably just making whatever muscular distortion you have actually worse. So the idea here is to lengthen or stretch shortened muscles, and if anything, shorten already lengthened muscles or keep it as is so they have a balance between the two. So if my quads are very lengthened and probably not very tight at all, relatively loose is the word we'll use for the average person, and my hamstrings are very shortened, or for the average person, we're just going to say that it's tight. Doesn't always mean that it's exactly the same, but on average, I'm going to probably, if my hamstrings are very tight and shortened, I'm going to stretch that muscle, but I'm not going to stretch my quads necessarily before a quad workout, because then I'm just making the muscle imbalance between the two in terms of how they're lengthened and shortened even greater. So there's no point in doing that just blindly. That's what a lot of people do.
Yeah, the thought is that it's just to warm up the muscle, and that's not what you should be doing at all. What you should be doing is called what we call mobility drills and or priming the muscles and the joints to be able to fire the way that you want them to.
Yeah.
And then the easiest way to picture it is your posture. So most people's shoulders are rounding forward, which means that if you're watching this on video, that my shoulders are forward, therefore my chest is actually shortening and my upper back is actually lengthening. So most of us have weaker back muscles because they're lengthened, so you have more range of motion to move through, or you don't know how to fire it, and better pushing muscles or stronger chest muscles because you're actually a little more forward. It's more shortened. You have less range of motion to work with, and when you have less range of motion to work with, you usually are stronger with that range of motion. So in this case, is you're probably better off with stretching and opening up the chest cavity. So what you do is just like go to a corner of a wall, put both hands against it in 90-degree angles with your elbows at shoulder height, and then pushing into the wall to about a 6 or 7 stretching tolerance. And what that will do is open up the chest cavity, so now you have more range of motion to work with. That's when stretching helps. But do not use it as a warm-up. Yep. Use it as a very specific tool to help you get into a better range of motion.
Exactly. Do everything with a purpose, guys. And let's roll into the next biggest myth here, which I think this is one of the biggest ones in the fitness industry. It's that you can lose fat from certain areas. The idea that you could spot reduce. So this is typically used with losing stomach fat. Like, oh, this is all the ways to lose your stubborn belly fat, or how to lose the fat in your chest. Like, do these exercises or eat this food. It doesn't work like that. Everyone's body stores fat based on different proportions. Some people, I mean, there are on average, like men will store more in their stomach, women will store more in their lower body, but everyone's an individual and they store fat in different proportions in different areas. And some places where they store fat, they just happen to store fat more. So typically what happens is that your body, as you lose fat, you start to lose fat from your whole body overall, but some places it will come off quicker than others. That's just how your genetics are set up, basically. So for you guys out there that are trying to lose stomach fat, that might start to gradually come off, but you're still going to have a lot more potentially, even after you lost 10, 15 pounds, and you're going to be saying, how do I lose my stomach fat? Well, really, it's just to healthily and safely continue to lose body fat in order to lose that stubborn belly fat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, understand that fat on your body is a mechanism for survival. So fat itself on the body is for extra energy storage. And to be in a healthy range, your body does want to keep a certain amount on it at all times. And it's a big range. For men, it's about 10 to 20% is the consensus. And for women, just add about 10% on top of that. So it's about, at times, like 18 to 20%.
Yeah.
So those are the healthy ranges. In terms of spot reduction, your body reduces fat in a way where it's going to be maintaining its health first as much as possible. So in this case, for men, the last 2 places that you'll lose are most likely going to be around your waist and then around your chest. Those are just the main 2 that are statistically going to be the last ones for men. So if you feel like you have stubborn body fat to lose around your waist, that you have pretty lean arms and they're veiny even though you have a big gut, well, yeah, just because a survival mechanism is to maintain the organs around the waist.
No, exactly. See, I'm a little interesting in the sense that I don't start showing veins in my arms until I'm like sub 10% body fat, and then they get much more prominent. And my dad, for example, he'll have a much bigger gut, but his arms are like shredded. Other parts of his body are much leaner, and he's much more vascular. And even vascularity just comes down to genetics to a certain extent as well. But there are people like that. So for me, I get sometimes upset when I'm working out in just a tank top at the gym because underneath I'm a little bit more leaner and my arms aren't, so I feel fatter than I am. But really, it's just almost as if it really is that my arms are just a little fatter than other parts of my body. That's how my genetics work. So it works better at the beach when I can actually have my shirt off, and then I'm leaner in my stomach at a higher body fat than other people would have to be.
Yeah, everybody holds body fat differently. In your cases, there actually is research on especially vein distribution. So basically, as you get older, you're actually going to have, as you work out more veins going to the body parts that you work on. So you're
just like muscle. It's kind of how people refer to like muscle maturity.
Yeah, so like you have a grainier muscle and all that kind of stuff. And then vein-wise, you actually will have more blood pathways going into muscle because you are utilizing it more. So your body's actually adapting to
send more blood to that area.
There's actually a name for it. I actually can't think of it on top of my head.
I have heard brief, like very little about what you're talking about, but I understand. Yeah. And then
it's true though.
Also, I think there's the idea just as you get older, your skin gets a little different, right? Tighter, I would presume, and then
Yeah, people call it grainy. Like it looks
grainier.
looks grainier.
Yeah, that's why when people like see bodybuilders on stage, the younger ones, they would say are less grainy. They don't have that grainy look.
That's basically what it is.
Yeah. All right, so let's transition into the next one then. It's a pretty big one as well. This is more of a dieting myth. It's that you should stay away from really carbs and fat and just eat a bunch of protein because carbs are going to make you fat and fat's going to make you fat. These ideas are actually pretty crazy. Like we've talked about numerous times before, obviously there's so much that goes along with having a calorie deficit, but what's going to make you lose fat and weight in general is a calorie deficit. So when it comes to staying away from carbs and fat, that just doesn't make any sense because we've already cited all the studies before where the Twinkie professor is what they coined it, where he ate predominantly Twinkies, high sugar, high fat foods, and lost 27 pounds in like 6 weeks. We don't recommend that, but he did that eating almost everything but protein. So it's not that. It's really just an equation of calories. Now, what we do recommend is eating more protein than probably you are currently, up to around 0.8 grams of protein per pound of body weight to derive the most benefit, along with having a balanced diet. So that includes having adequate carbs, having adequate fats. When you extremely limit any of these macronutrients, your hormones are going to be out of whack. Your body's going to be compensating in different ways. You're not going to get the optimal benefits of protein because it's going to be utilizing that protein for other responsibilities in the body that otherwise wouldn't if you're limiting carbs and fat. If you're limiting fat too much, your hormones are going to be shitty. You're not going to be able to produce enough testosterone or whatever it is.
Yeah, and if you limit carbs, then your performance in the gym is going to suffer drastically. Yeah. So in this case, we don't want you to demonize either carbs and or fat. What you do want to do is have a balance from the beginning. Make sure you understand what your calorie intake is. Make sure your protein is set to a certain amount, which is 0.6 to 0.8 grams, like Benji said. And then from there, what you want to do is have a balance of carbs and fats. And then from there, you can play with a little bit more carbs, a little bit less fat, or a little bit more fat in your diet and a little bit less carbs. But understand that in every research study that has come out recently, that when calories are equated and they manipulated the carbs and the fats, protein maintained also the same, that the results were the same. Both groups still lost fat and maintained the same muscle mass since they're on the same training protocol. So at the end of the day, you want to make sure that you're not demonizing other, but your body may like one or the other more so, but you have to play with that. So don't demonize it. Just understand that calories at the end of the day are the biggest picture. Think of it as calories are king and protein is queen, and then everything else after that are the little details.
I think the easiest way, at least for me, this is how I look at it, and then you could share maybe how you do it, but I look at how much protein I'm taking in terms of grams because it's easy to just equate that with a percentage of my body weight. So let's say that I weigh about 180 grams. I weigh 180 grams. I weigh 180 pounds of. I weigh 180 pounds, so now I'm taking in somewhere around 160 to 170 grams of protein, something along those lines. When it comes to fats and carbs, I look at it now in terms of percentages of my diet. It's really easy when you use an app to just see those percentages. For carbs, I make sure I'm somewhere in between 40 and 60%. Some people could drop below that number, and especially when they're cutting, it sometimes just inherently happens. But for me, my body likes carbs a little more, so I'm going to be on that upper end. And then with fat, we don't recommend anyone really dropping below 20 or 15%. That's what's really going to start to mess up your hormones. This idea that fat makes you fat is just not rooted in any science whatsoever. So I make sure I'm anywhere really above 20%, usually below 30%. That's how my body responds best. But when it comes to setting your own goals, put that protein number at ideally around 0.8 grams of protein if you're trying to get optimal muscle protein synthesis in conjunction with going to the gym, having a routine there, trying to build muscle, and then manipulate your fats and carbs afterwards, trying to play with, okay, do I do better with a little bit less fats, a little bit more carbs, or the other way around, or somewhere in between?
Yeah, well, people don't understand where this comes from. It's actually all marketing and falsified studies. Just some awesome facts. The reason why we went low fat, because the author of the massive study, I'm not going to mention his name, but he did something with eggs, touting that eggs were really bad for you, especially the yolk. So is
he a liar?
Huh? Yeah.
You should mention his name then. He's a liar.
I actually don't remember the name.
Oh, okay.
Off the top of my head. I do have it saved. But just understand
You're trying to save yourself. I messed it up.
Just imagine he made that study, and it wasn't done very well. But based off that study, we actually changed our nutritional guideline to make that fats were inherently bad. So everything from about the 80s and 90s was switched from all to low fat, no
that's
fat
where
at
the idea
all.
comes from.
And then what happened was they since to make everything low fat takes out a lot of flavor, so they added sugar into everything, and then that's actually where the food pyramid came from the 90s to 2000s, which is all the grains. And then also on that end, so we went from low fat to high carb. And in that end, they falsified studies by a big brand company, which you can probably think of on top of your head. That is the head of all cereals and wheat and brands that we all go from. And they falsified those studies to say that these are great for your heart health. Eat these cereals for breakfast. Have this for orange juice for breakfast. Have pancakes for breakfast.
It's crazy.
And we went from low fat to high carbs. And now we're in the situation where all of those nutrition recommendations have now become our detriment because of these false claims.
And then we make more false claims as a result of the previous ones. It just keeps spiraling. It's like getting yourself caught in a lie, and then it just keeps going. Yeah. Even our own government now has this crazy food pyramid. I don't know if you saw it. It was about a year ago.
I don't even want to know it.
Yeah,
it's so bad.
Maybe we'll like pop up a picture on the screen or just put it in the podcast notes. But it's this crazy idea. Like I think it goes along with the idea that the egg yolks are really bad for you. It's like all at the bottom. It's just all back. Not completely backwards, but it's pretty backwards. It's just wrong.
Yeah,
it's outright misinformation.
That's why we're doing this for you guys and for our clients, is because we don't want you guys to be misinformed. But just understand that we always look at the history of why these things came about. So you should stay away from carbs and fats was because of a falsified study, and they were genuinely trying to find the right answer for the fat question of how much is too much or is it bad for you. In this case, you just correlated high fats to high cholesterol because of eggs, and therefore he made it a correlative conclusion to say that most fat is bad. You probably shouldn't have high fats, especially cholesterol. And look at us now, and now we're touting actually the opposite end, where egg is probably the life's natural multivitamin, which it does have plenty of vitamins.
Yeah, let your food be thy medicine, and thy medicine be your food.
Yeah,
it's true. All right, well let's get into another tip, and that was really good insight. Like I learned a good amount there, but there's an idea that there's no such thing as overtraining, just under eating, or the idea that basically you could just train for hours on end. And I've talked about this before. I learned that the hard way because I sort of believe this. It was just like no pain, no gain. I'm just going to work out like nonstop, do like 25 sets of failure for every single muscle group. And I got 103 plus fever 3 times in a row within like 3 weeks. My body couldn't handle it anymore, and I didn't know what was going on. So eventually I figured it out. But look, I don't believe that we should. I think that there is sort of this growth in this overtraining idea where people really don't know what overtraining is because they think they're close to failure and they're really not. And then they just use it as an excuse and pussy out from training hard. Like there's totally that side. And I think that's probably at least like 50%. But then there's the other 50% that maybe not 50%, but there's the other side that believes that you just have to keep training and training and training. And a lot of these people that promote this idea are on special sports supplements or exogenous hormones that help them recover more and grow more in the gym, which aren't really good for your health. So you take that in consideration and say, okay, me as the average person who's natural but still optimizing my health, how much is too much? And I mean, there's not an exact number. We think that anywhere from 10 to 20 sets per muscle group within a closer proximity to failure is a good idea. But if you should learn to auto-regulate your body and say, okay, like I'm dying right now, like I do need to step back. Like what Chris and I typically do is we put our training into cycles where we go for 5 to 6 weeks and gradually build up our volume, overreach on the last week to the point where the next week, if we kept going, we wouldn't be able to really recover. And then we kind of take a recovery period where we're still in the gym, but just with less volume the next week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this really just comes down to a misunderstanding of training itself. You have to understand training itself is a stress on the body. But with that stress, you want to recover and adapt from, these are all good things. Like this is what we were intending to do. And now there is a line of which is good training. And then there's a massive gap to where it's considered all of it is good training to where the upper threshold is what we call overtraining. So that is like the science way of thinking about it. Now, when you're eating enough calories, that threshold can actually widen on the further end. So yes, eating the right amounts and or more, so a surplus, will raise that volume amount threshold that you can handle. The issue with this saying that you can just you're under eating. You're under eating versus overtraining is false, because no matter what, if I ate, my calories were at 4,000 calories and then I ate 5,000 calories, it's not going to make up for the 100 sets of bench press I just did yesterday.
Yeah, it doesn't endlessly increase the threshold of what you can handle.
Yeah, it's just, it all it does is, extra food does help, but it is not a never-ending cycle of limitless power.
Precisely.
You're not Superman, okay?
Yeah. We might wish we were Superman, but Chris is Nightwing. He's wearing a Nightwing shirt right now.
Yeah, I'm wearing a Nightwing shirt.
And Nightwing doesn't have those powers, so no one could do it.
Exactly.
All right, so there's another training myth, which I hear a lot of women say this a lot, but I think also men as well. The idea that it'll make you too bulky, especially if you want a leaner physique. And there's not really anything grounded in this other than people potentially seeing really jacked people, probably bodybuilders, and saying, I don't want to look like that. But saying that you don't want to lift because you're going to look like Ronnie Coleman is the excuse to not lift is like saying that you don't want to start taking up soccer as a hobby because you're going to be as good as Lionel Messi, or that you don't want to start playing football because you're going to be as good as Tom Brady. Like, that's just not, you're not going to just start doing that and become that good at football, that good at soccer, that big in the gym. And even if you don't want to become too bulky, we have to define what bulky means, because generally that just means that if you're going to the gym and getting bulkier, you're probably putting on fat along with that muscle and not manipulating other variables properly. So especially if you're a woman and you're saying, I don't want to go to the gym because it's going to make me bulky, it's actually probably going to make you leaner if you do everything properly, because you're going to be lifting weights, which is going to increase your metabolic rate. It's going to boost your metabolism. And that through time is going to allow you to burn more calories as long as you're manipulating the other variables properly. So, and then also like in terms of bulkiness, as long as you manipulate how you're training, like if anything, that's just going to make you, like I said, leaner, but more attractive as well, because you're going to be able to bring up the muscle groups that are going to be more prominent, whether you're a female or a male.
So for some of you that have predispositions to hyper-responsive muscle groups, in this case, that might be that you don't have to hit, let's say your shoulders are very hyper-responsive, or your quads, whatever it might be, and you don't want that one to be super big, or you just know that it grows pretty well. Then in that case, what you can do is you can dial back the volume. You can still hit it, but just make sure you dial back the amount of work that you need to put into it. Like, you don't have to set up your program to where it's completely even. Like, say, like 8 sets for your legs a week, and starting at 12 sets for your upper body per body part. That's for men. And then for women, I have plenty of women that say, I don't want broad shoulders, I don't want a big chest or a square chest. So in those cases, what I will do is I will make sure that they're still hitting their compound movements overall, but there's no isolations unless I want them to make sure they feel the muscle. But in that cases, that means they also have to be hyper responsive, in which case most women I've worked with are not hyper responsive to crazy amounts of shoulder training, crazy amounts of chest training, and or crazy amounts of back training. Some women are actually afraid to get really big backs. And realistically is you just want to make sure that you have a healthy and a strong body. But if you have a preference of having a little bit less muscle on one end, then hey, guess what? Then make sure that you're just doing the bare minimum. We're not telling you to get hyper focus on it. We're just saying that it's not gonna make you bulky, but make sure that you're still hitting those muscle groups. Yeah. And then you're also I lost track.
No, it's all right. It's pretty simple though. Like it's take Flex Wheeler for example. I think there was a whole year where I can't remember if it was the flip side around or not, but I think he didn't train his entire upper body for almost an entire year out from the Olympia just to train his legs and to bring them up. And that did wonders for him. My girlfriend hasn't trained legs in 2 years, and she looks like she's trained them for like 10 years and should compete. Like people respond differently to certain muscle groups, right? Like I hammer my chest and I don't get nearly as much growth as I want to, but I do half of that for back, and my back gets much wider through time. So all of these things add up, and it's just simple. It's an art, bodybuilding in its purest form, not necessarily competing on stage. It's like being a sculptor, but instead of actually using clay or using your own body, it's like taking clay and saying, oh, I need more shoulders. Like I'm going to put that clay on here. I need more chest. I'm going to put that clay up here and up here. Right? So that's what it is in its purest form, and it's actually quite simple when you start to look at it like that.
Yeah, just know that most of you are probably not in that 1% where you're hyper responsive. Lifting is not going to make you bulky. Just make sure that you have your training principles in place. And then if you have some body parts that are hyper responsive, then yes, by all means, you can bring down the volume. But I guarantee you're not in that 1% where you have to worry about not hitting it at all.
Yeah. And let's roll into our sixth fitness myth here, which is that free weights are better than machines or vice versa. And then you could start to apply this to other modalities, like dumbbells are better than barbells or vice versa, and just comparing all of them. But really the idea is that I don't know exactly where this stems from, but maybe it's that, hey, the barbell, they're a part of the 3 biggest lifts. You could lift the largest amount, so that's the most stimulus on the muscles. But really, through a large period of time anyways, a longer period of time, not week to week, your body adapts to a given stimulus, and you need to start giving your body a new stimulus, something that's fresh. And I think maybe people start avoiding certain exercise modalities like machines or even Smith machines because they think, oh, that's for pussies. Like the free weights is where it's at. Like I'm just gonna get like all sweaty and bloody on the dumbbells, and like no, like every modality has a time and place. The guys from Mind Pump, I think it was Sal that said it was the best exercise for you is the one that you're not currently doing. So if you're doing all barbell stuff and all machine stuff, but you're not doing any dumbbell stuff, maybe the best exercise for you is a dumbbell fly or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the main takeaway from this is understand movement patterns and then make sure your technique is right with those movement patterns. And there's a big 7, but understand that once you have those movement patterns down, then you should be experimenting with different types of modalities in those movement patterns. For example, you do not have to do a barbell bench press to grow your chest. What I will say though is I definitely want you to understand how to do a barbell bench press. And then after you understand how to, then have some proxies to see if it is a good exercise for you. So let's say you get to a point where you're bench pressing 225 pounds as a male for 1 rep, which is good. That's solid for a lifter. Now, if you tell me afterwards, hey, coach, I don't feel it in my chest. I'm just moving weight, which is actually where the camp is for me. Then guess what? Barbell bench press probably isn't the best stimulus for my chest. And guess what? I'll have to find different movements to help hit my chest, whether it is changing the angle of my elbows in the bench press, whether it's using a chest machine, whether it's doing dumbbells or different angles for those presses. And I'll tell you right now, I don't feel my chest at all in a barbell bench press, especially when I go for a power lift, because I'm maximizing the amount of force I can produce with the least range of motion versus where I do an incline dumbbell bench press and my intent is to get a really good stretch at the bottom and squeeze at the top.
That's how. Yep. Yeah, I think if you're trying to hypertrophy your muscles and you're trying to figure out, should I do dumbbells, barbells, machines, what should I do? I think that should be the last of your concerns, and maybe that's an indicator why you're not growing muscle because you're focusing on too many variables. Instead, what you should be focusing on, like you said, is making sure your body's in an anatomically correct position so that you could feel the muscle, get a full stretch, a full contraction, that you can progressively overload on the given movement that you're doing, whether it's on a machine, a Smith machine, free weights, barbell, using barbells on the week-to-week basis. Focusing on that as aligned with your nutrition as well is going to be far more important than focusing on, should I do dumbbell press or barbell press? Should I do machine press or this modality? There's no point in thinking about all that and wasting all that time when instead just prioritizing the things that are going to make 90% of the difference you're not even focusing on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, just think of it like a thought process. Imagine to yourself that you're doing a barbell row and you feel nothing in your back, and you do a significant amount of weight. You do 135 pounds for a couple reps, but you think to yourself, man, I don't feel a damn thing in your lats or in your back at all. You're just moving. Now I put you on the machine row, and you're like, holy crap, man, I can feel every detail. I didn't know my muscles existed back there. I didn't even know it's a back exercise. I'm going to tell you right now that is most likely a better exercise for you because you're able to feel the muscle, squeeze it, and fatigue it. That is a target muscle. And I'm not saying this is for every exercise. I'm not going to tell you or ask you if you're doing a 3-rep max on your squat. Hey, bro, did you feel that in your quads? I'm going to be like, okay, did the movement look well? Did anything bother you? No, yes. Boom.
Like if you're lifting, like if you're squatting 6 plates with great form, you're going all the way down and locking out fully, then your quads are probably pretty big. Like there's going to be more variables you're concerned about at that point, but focus on getting to that point first before you worry about all these other what modality you should use.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, each modality is a tool, and yes, I do have a free weight bias because I come from that background of
I just think it's more fun.
Yeah, it's more fun. I come from a strongman background, a powerlifting background, so I am confined to the big 3 or some movements that I need to be doing, but overall, it's find what's good for your body and your joints and your muscles, and then experiment with that, and then switch it around for a couple more weeks, and see which modality overall at the end of the time works best for you.
Exactly. And let's go into our last training myth. So myth number 7 here is that there's a best body part training split that's magically going to help you more than as opposed to another split. So some common splits are going to be push-pull legs and then potentially repeated throughout the week. So push-pull legs, upper, lower, and then full body across the course of many days. And people focus on this for many different reasons. I think a lot of times it has to do with what their favorite influencer or bodybuilder or YouTuber tells them to do. And really, this kind of goes back to what we were talking about with which exercise modality you should be using. Instead of focusing on what the best split is, focus more on just training each muscle on average at least 2 times per week. Focus on progressive overloading each muscle on each given movement that you're performing for each movement. Focus on giving it your best in the gym. Focus on being consistent, showing up day in and day out, and focus on honing in on your diet. I think that that's far more important than thinking, hey, maybe if I manipulate like bicep curls this day and then do chest this day, and like trying to manipulate every variable when you can't even focus on like when you whatever. But like you get my point. I lost my train of thought there, but you know exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah, there's no magical best body part training split. I'm going to break it down as simple as this and allude it to it more. Yeah, our checklist is 1 is frequency. How many times are you hitting each body part per week? Right now, the actual literature says that it actually doesn't matter as much as we think. Practically, we recommend at least 2 to 3 times per week. Intensity, you have 2 types, right? Intensity of effort and intensity of load. So us as coaches, we don't really program in too much of intensity of load per se, only because we're not really working with powerlifters as much. We're working with people who just want to generally be healthy and look good. So we focus on intensity of effort, which is number 2. If we prescribe you a certain rep range for a certain exercise, that at the end of your set, we always ask, how many more reps could you have done after you finished? And if you say anything more than 3 to 4, then that set has now become more of a warm-up than an actual set of fatiguing that muscle. So we're going to go up either a little bit heavier in weight, or we're just going to make sure your technique is correct. And then volume. So make sure that your volume that we know now that is, you probably want to start generally around 8 to 10 sets per body part per week, 8 for your lower body, 10 for your upper body. And if that's not enough for you to progress in a week, then you start adding a little bit more as the weeks go on. And then you'll kind of find like a range where you feel the most progress at, but it's a pretty moderately large range.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, you have to make sure that you're progressing with those. So if you're using the same weights and the same sets and the same reps every time you come into the gym, that's not good. You want to make sure you do have to progress with progressive overload. Those are the big 4 checklists that we start with. And then the last proxy for that is just making sure that your technique is correct, because without technique first, then all that does not matter, because then you're just going to progress with bad technique. And there is no best body part split. Find one that you enjoy, because if you don't enjoy the ones you're doing, I guarantee you it's not going to be the best one, because you're not doing it consistently.
Yeah, exactly. There's no magical body part split. Focus on what makes the biggest difference for you, what's the most consistent, what you could adhere to, and one that allows you to train each muscle, like you said, about 2 to 3 times a week, that allows you to progressive overload, focus on good form and whatnot. But that's part of the reason why I'm almost smaller, because I didn't do those things. And for way too long, I focused on variables that people who were advanced should be focusing on. And that might make the 5% difference in their marginal gains. But for me, it was limiting me to not make the 90% of gains that I should have been making. So, I mean, it's when it comes down to training as a beginner into intermediate, things are much more simpler than people tend to make them. And yes, we sit here for hours talking about all these different things regarding training, nutrition, and variables, because that's what we do. But for the average person, what we're recommending is to actually try and simplify it much more.
Yeah, dude, make sure you get the fundamentals down, and then you can start playing with the intricacies. But even so, people do have trouble even getting down the fundamentals first. And I preach fundamentals over everything, because the fundamentals get over 80%. And in this case, for body part training splits, is understanding that you have to make sure that you're hitting each body part, hopefully 2 to 3 times per week. You're training hard enough in that rep range with the right amount of weight, and then that you're doing enough work over the course of the week. So we start off at 8 sets for lower body and 10 sets for upper body part. And then that you're making sure that you're progressing with each movement with great technique. That's it.
Yep.
Start there.
All right, guys. So visit www.thegenerationfit.com for tons of free resources, free guides, visuals, videos, you name it. We've got it there. And have a good one.
Have a good one, guys.